Absolutely no doubt now. I'm doing for sure what I'm best at and also what I love. My name's Alex Bernstein. I'm a glass artist living in Asheville, North Carolina. Both my parents are glass artists. Most all of my parents' friends are artists. I was pretty much around art all my life. Growing up, it just always seemed like what my parents did and what my parents' friends did. So when I went to college, I didn't really want to do what my parents did. So I kind of almost shunned the art world a little bit and went off and studied other things before I realized it was my true love. Art was always part of my voice, my vocabulary. It's what I knew. And I took classes at Penland throughout that, and I kept taking classes and doing art kind of always. It was just part of who I was as a person, so I was always doing art, but I thought, well, maybe there's other things out there. And so I have a very hard time on Libra, so I have a very hard time with decisions making. So it wasn't ultimately clear what decision I should make, but there's absolutely no doubt now. I'm doing, I think for sure, what I'm best at and also what I love. I don't just like working in my studio, I love what I do. Vacations are difficult for me because I'm like, oh, I have to be doing something with my hands. I have to make something. I want to create, and it just is part of who I am. And so I feel really lucky that I think I chose the right direction. My art doesn't have a literal function other than to be interesting. I think is maybe not my favorite word, but I would say that my work is intriguing, perhaps has a sense of mystery. I like the fact that someone sees my glass sculpture and says, I don't know what that is. And I like that idea of this mystery and that it perhaps doesn't look like anything you've seen before. And I do that for myself. I come in my studio and look around and say, what do I have that I've never seen before? In the art world, there's kind of this phrase that everything's already been done. And throughout history, there's always been something done, and that may be true. So I don't want to be presumptuous enough to say that I'm discovering new things always, but for me, I want to see something literally in my studio that I've never seen before. And then I realize that's up to me to come up with. I like to play with the color. I have several different kinds of glass. Some glass, I can mix the different colors together, and much like a painter. In fact, my father is a painter and has a painting studio, and you know, again, mixing the colors together, I sometimes feel like I'm painting. But with glass, there's always an element of surprise because it's very unique material and it does really interesting things. And sometimes I don't know what's going to happen. And I love that. Happy accidents has been something that's worked really, really well for me in the past. And I try to give myself enough freedom to experiment. I believe strongly that mental health is very much connected to these. So I think using my hands to do something is very much connected. I guess I shouldn't speak wholly to the whole world, but I do feel strongly that probably using your hands to make things is very much related to mental health. And speaking of myself is I feel best, most happy when I'm making something and using my hands. And I literally am carrying the pieces around and almost hugging them and holding them when I'm on, I have a big buffing wheel that I use cerium oxide and pumice, and I'm holding the sculpture. And so it's literally physically part of what I do. So I feel like I pour a lot of myself into my artwork. As a relatively anxious type person, taking risk is something I try to avoid. Success is try to take risks. You know, without risk, there's no reward is kind of a cliche statement, but I do believe that taking risks will lead to things.
When I was growing up, taking art lessons, I only thought of art as things that are not useful. A painting, a drawing, a sculpture, whatever it is, if it's useful, it's an object, it's craft. I'm Brian Boggs. I'm a professional chair maker. I've been designing and making chairs for 40 years now. I ran across a book called The Fine Art of Cabinet Making by James Krenov. And I thought, what an oxymoron. How can cabinet making be art? And so I had to read the book just because it's, the Fine Art Academy. You got to be kidding me. And it was fascinating. And I didn't realize at the time what was happening, but what happened in a sense is that book cracked me open to a different dimension of art than I considered before. Chairs are where my passion is, because it's whatever medium you're working with, whatever the material is, being able to imagine it coddling a person and expressing beauty. Often want to elevate the practice of whatever it is you're talking about by calling it an art. An art to designing shoes, there's an art to building that machine over there. And there's also a science and there's a craft involved. And there's an imagination involved. The marriage of all of those that is not perverted by the ego is where great things happen. There's something about wood that I think all people relate to. We're interdependent. We breathe what they exhale. That's pretty much at the core of our being. When I was growing up, taking art lessons, I only thought of art as things that are not useful. A painting, a drawing, a sculpture, whatever it is. If it's useful, it's an object, it's craft. And I used to fight that difference and argue with people that called my chairs art, because they would do it in a sense that this is too good to call it craft, this is actually art, and they were trying to compliment me, and I got that. But part of me would get angry, because why isn't craft holding the same elevated status as art? What we're doing is helping people open up and think a little bit more broadly about what possibilities are for something that would be an ordinary object otherwise. That's the crux of what we're doing. That a functional object can be a lot more than a functional object. I think that making mundane furniture also impacts. There's a deadening. Well, we're rewarding them now. Look further. You'll see some cool stuff. You'll see the grain coming together in a particular way that's just nicely balanced. And then you start using a little bit more of yourself to experience what you're looking at. And then that's coming alive. There's a certain deadness that we're trying to bring back to life that I really feel is an important role as an artist. And I think all art does that to a degree. It's a certain waking up that we create when we're successful at doing what we're doing.
I'd love to do women because I haven't seen my mother in like 40-something years. So I don't know what she looks like. My name is Jenny Pickens. I am a self-taught mixed media artist. I started being creative at a very young age, maybe around 5 or so. It was a lot of things going on personally at home, and being the youngest, it was something I started making things, and it was just like putting me into this whole different world. So I would sit there and use old shoe boxes and what other resources I had around me, because we can be really inventive and just use what you have. As I got into school, I started kindergarten. I had an art teacher who would say, you're a very good artist, and I started painting. That's when I was first introduced to painting. And she was just so inspiring to me and always encouraged me. And from that time on, I just felt like it's just something I always wanted to do. There's several reasons why I do faces. One is I love to do the eyes because the eyes kind of talk about who the person is. You can get more detail. I haven't seen my mother in like 40-something years. So I don't know what she looks like. I love to do women because I was like, what does she look like? So I generally go to that form, just to portraits, just that story, that whatever it shows behind the eyes. I believe something you can go through as a child can also go through you through life, and then that's how you're expressing yourself. Because I notice now that when I'm doing work, it sort of reflects back to my childhood still, whether it's the colors or the subject I'm doing. It all resonates back to that. So I think it does. One thing I will not do is a self-portrait because it just doesn't look like me when I'm drawing doing the painting. So I kind of stay away from those. And I usually tell people I paint what I see. So if I'm doing something for someone, okay, this is my vision, this is how I see it. Everything I put all of my heart and sweat and tears and feeling all into every piece I create, because it's like I'm inside that picture. It's really scary, like, to step out and try it, but just think, years from now, if you didn't do it, you'll be always regretting what you didn't do. So, and it's okay to make a mistake, and it may not work, but at least you tried. I always said years ago, people would say, well, why are you still here in Asheville? And I thought, well, if I can't be successful in the town where I live, why go somewhere else? So, and I want to encourage other people the same way. You don't have to necessarily leave and go somewhere else. Try to create something where you're at right then, and then you can build that relationship. Then you can go off and branch off to other places. So. This is a monochromatic style painting I did, or I'm working on, and it's just one color, and it's just variations of the shade of blue. And only difference I like to do in my paintings, because I truly see everything in black and white. So the original image that I use for this is in color, but I just kind of take my mind out of all the color and just add different shades. One thing in particular I like to do is have a pop of color on it as well. So that's where the eyes come in. So I decided to make the eyes a little brown where they stand out a little bit more.
Heartbeats just to know you're in control. I learn from you with every step I made. I can see the
I'm Stephen Forbes-deSoule, and I do Raku ceramics. Raku is a special kind of firing process, and it's different from all other kinds of ceramics in the sense that it's one piece or small number of pieces are fired up in a small kiln, and it takes about an hour to an hour and a half to fire the kiln. And then the kiln is opened up and the hot piece is taken out and put into a metal container with combustible materials. Catches on fire, and burns for about 6 to 8 seconds. Put the lid on, smothers the flames, it's oxygen starved, and it creates special effects on the pottery and the glazes. Because of the oxygen starvation, the oxygen is pulled out of the glaze and clay. I found after I started doing art that it was a wonderful way to express yourself. I was very happy doing that. I had fun, and then I realized it was important to have fun in whatever work you were doing. And when I was in the corporate world, I did not have any fun. And clay is, it's just basically mud. So I'm playing with dirt, and it's very It's a lot of fun to take something that's just a lump of mud and make something out of it that is, hopefully is a good form. About 25 years ago, I started developing my own glaze recipes, and that really changed everything for me. That made it a lot more fun. I was making glazes that were different than anybody else had. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Raku. Raku was first done by the Japanese about 500 years ago. They did a different style than what American Raku, which is what I do. In 1960, a California potter named Paul Solner had been reading about this Japanese Raku, and he had the task of developing a project for Art Day at the college he taught at, Claremont College, which is in California. He had built a small kiln by the reflecting pool and was firing up pieces and pulling them out and quenching them in the water, which is one of the ways the Japanese did Raku. And in the last firing of the day, he was waiting for the kiln to finish, and he noticed these pepper leaves lying around on the ground. And he wondered, what if I piled these up and put the pottery in the pepper leaves? Because he said that the glazes were totally awful that he was getting from the quenching in the water. And he noticed that they were a lot richer and a lot more to his liking by putting the hot pottery in the combustibles, the pepper leaves. And that was really the beginning of American Rakus. I want to have pleasure in what I do. My goal is to make something that's beautiful. I'm not trying to make a political statement, but I am trying to achieve a level of beauty for my own pleasure, and then hopefully for anybody else who might enjoy seeing it.
Asheville's first century is really marked by its remoteness. It was really hard to get to, and as such it stayed a very small town. It was founded in 1794. Asheville starts off as frankly a one-horse town. It was a stopover point in the Blue Ridge for livestock drovers. Up until 1880, railroad completely transformed Asheville. With that is the coming of the Vanderbilts in the 1880s and the opening of the Biltmore estate in 1895 by George Vanderbilt. That added to Asheville's cachet, and we see more and more folks drawn to Asheville. In the late 1920s, the city of Asheville and the county of Buncombe decided to build a new city hall and a new county courthouse. They hired Doug Ellington, a noted architect out of Pittsburgh who'd been trained at the famous École des Beaux-Arts. And Ellington designed for Asheville and Buncombe County a matched pair of Art Deco towers. He was an early student of that movement and ends up being one of the key architects of that movement as well. The Asheville City Hall is a great example of Art Deco in its finest. Carolina's first skyscraper, a beautiful building designed by local architect Ronald Green in the Gothic Revival style. Why Gothic Revival? Because that's what they were building in Chicago. And at that time, Asheville really is fancying itself as becoming a major city of the Southeast. And as such, if you want to be a player, you've got to look like a player. And so this was a great way for Asheville to continue to make its architectural mark. So unfortunately for Asheville, its big boom of the early 20th century would prove to be its downfall for the middle of the 20th century. The city, because of its enormous growth in the 1920s, ends up amassing a debt of some $54 million. In today's money, well more than $800 million for a city of 50,000. So for much of the 20th century, Asheville is burdened with an enormous debt from the Great Depression. and it causes it to basically freeze like an insect in prehistoric amber. Even after World War II, while the rest of the Sun Belt South is growing by leaps and bounds, Asheville's not only not growing, it actually recedes in population a little bit. Folks said, well, let's turn the misfortune of the Great Depression into our fortune. And we see by the late 1970s a real strong effort at downtown revitalization, the beginning of what's locally referred to as the Asheville Renaissance. Asheville's arts and craft movement really traces back to the early part of the 20th century and to the Biltmore estate. Edith Vanderbilt, the wife of the creator of the estate, George Vanderbilt, took a great interest in traditional Appalachian crafts and ends up forming the Biltmore homespun shops to preserve traditional Appalachian craft such as basket weaving and textiles. And in many ways, that is the beginning of a resurgence in local craft and appreciation that continued to grow through the 20th century, but today continues to just explode. Asheville has hundreds of professional artists who call Asheville home. It's one of the largest groups of professional artists of any city in the United States, doing everything from those traditional crafts still to beautiful glass sculpture, 2D work, mural work, textiles, all of those things.